So we get to the Eagles review for 2024, and fairly similarly to North and Richmond, expectations at the start of the year weren't the highest. Though, when it did work, things were fun to watch. My name's Woody, and this is Wooden Spoon Data, the 18th best AFL channel on YouTube. And in today's assessment of the Eagles, we are joined by Jesse from True Footy and True Eagle. How are you doing today, Jesse?
Very well, thanks, Woody. Keen to chat about the West Coast Eagles. We've just had a pretty positive draft, I would have thought. And this is where we start to lead into the delusion that next year is going to be much better than this year. So otherwise, I'm good.
Yeah, I think you're going to improve. You've had time to reflect on things now. Do you have a player you're most excited to watch next year?
That's a good question. The player that I think is my favourite from the draft might be Job Shanahan, but I don't know how early he's going to crack a game, but I'll still be watching how he performs in the waffle and whether he starts forward or back. I think he is the best value for selection that we got, value selection that we picked up, and I think we got a long-term player there, so he's one I've attached myself to. But there's a lot of underrated young kids at West Coast no one really knows about yet, and then there's Elijah Hewitt who might actually be the best of the lot. So there is a bit to be excited about, which wasn't true, 12, 18 months ago. Anything prior to Harley Reid. So we're in a good spot now.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what Shanahan can do. I think he was one of the biggest sliders on draft night, so I'm excited for West Coast and their fans. In today's video, we'll be taking a look back at West Coast's best 22 in 2024 to see where they excelled and where they could improve in 2025 to get back to being a contending side. To do this, I've made a simple spreadsheet to compare the Eagles players against the average player in the same position. We can also compare each player against the average top 4 player in the same position from the last 5 years. In this review, we'll go about things a little bit differently to past reviews. Jesse's already put out best 22 videos for 2024 and 2025. So we'll be basing these 22 lineups off of those videos and discussing some thoughts I have about the best 22 in general. So basically, I've taken every stat and every position and then compared stats between an average player in a given position and a top 4 player from the last 5 years in the same position to determine what stats are important for each position. There's a lot of positions.
Positions!
For example, Harley Reid has 24 out of 42 important stats above the average midfielder this year, but that drops to 21 out of 42 if we were to raise the average to that of a top 4 mid over the last 5 years. The average midfielder had 8.53 handballs this year and Reid had 10 and therefore was more than the average 2024 midfielder. But if we compare him to a top 4 mid over the last 5 years where the average has been 10.1, he is lower than the average top 4 mid. Make sense? Good. So we did that for every position and every stat we deemed important for that position. So let's start with defense. Looking at key defenders first, this past year it seems like the Eagles were leaning towards a 3 key position defensive structure before the mid-season break, and then after they struggled to keep the likes of all of Jeremy McGovern, Tom Barrass and Harry Edwards healthy and on the field. In your best 22 before the trade and draft video, you had the back 6 as Brady Hough, Harry Edwards, Rhett Bazzo, Liam Duggan, Jeremy McGovern and Ruben Jimby, with Tom Cole and Harvey Johnson on the bench. I'll be using the majority of that lineup, but because it wasn't exactly made with the intent of comparing the best 22 from 2024 to the potential output of the 2025 best 22, I'll be replacing Rhett Bazzo with Tom Barrass. In your most recent video, post-trade and draft, defensive lineups included Brady Hough, Harry Edwards, Ryan Marrick, Liam Baker, Jeremy McGovern and Ruben Jimby, with just Tom Cole on the bench and Bo Allen sneaking in for a sub spot. I'll say more of my thoughts for the best 2025 defensive lineup in a moment, as I might have some slight changes, but I do have a question I wanted to ask you here, Jesse. You've got Ryan Marrick in your 3rd key position defensive role. Jamison is more experienced in the key defender role. Do you think the trio of him, Edwards and McGovern is too tall, or what's the thoughts here?
So it's an interesting one comparing the heights with someone like Marrick, because I feel like there's a bit of fake news about his height on the Eagles website. I think he might be, I'm not sure what he's listed at, but I'm pretty sure he's about 196. So he's kind of really grown since being drafted. As for him in the back line, that one was a bit of a creative move for me at first. I just thought we had this talented kid who he probably can't fit in the forward line with all those tools. You may or may not really be a wingman. But down back, we probably need some reinforcement. And I think he did play a little bit of that underage. in his junior years. Further to that, I think in the preseason, and I don't remember if it was before or after that video, he started training with the back. So I think he's been, potentially highlighted for a role back there. And I think talent-wise, he's just got a fair bit on someone like a Cal Jamison, who's a bit more speculative. So it's a bit of a creative one, and probably for the sake of development rather than, absolute best 22 locked in.
In both versions of the best 22 before and after the trade and draft period, you've opted for a 3 key position defensive structure, and I generally think that's best for the Eagles too. West Coast key defenders this year were Jeremy McGovern with 19 games, Tom Barrass with 18, Harry Edwards with 9, Callum Jamieson with 4, and Rhett Bazzo with just the 1 match. West Coast didn't add a key defender with AFL experience to their list this off-season. Looking at important stats above average for key defenders, there are 2 clear standouts in Jeremy McGovern with 32 out of 37 and Tom Barrass with 25 out of 37. With Barrass's departure, Callum Jamieson and Harry Edwards are a fairly big step down with 13 out of 37 and 12 out of 37 respectively. While Rhett Bazzo is only on 4 out of 37, he was hampered with a groin injury throughout the year and did only play in the final match, losing by 93 points. So he can be somewhat forgiven. I've looked at Marrick's numbers compared to a key position defender, and while it doesn't mean much as his stats don't come from him playing in that role, he did get 9 out of 37. And though his numbers don't mean much in that role individually, it will be somewhat helpful for the overall defensive output comparison in a moment. So let's move on to West Coast medium defenders. We've already mentioned who will be in the 2024 starting defensive roles and some members of the bench, but let's quickly touch on the medium defender position as a whole before going to some of the changes I think should be made to the lineup that Jesse's given. This year, Liam Duggan, Ruben Jimby, Brady Hoff, Tom Cole, and Alex Witherden all played over 18 games, with Josh Rotham playing 13 and Harvey Johnson playing just 6 matches. West Coast also picked up Bo Allen in the draft, and personally I think he probably makes it straight into the side, but I'll come back to him in a second. I also want to come back and ask Jesse a question about him too. First, I'll address the numbers there, as I'm guessing some Eagles fans are probably questioning them right now, seeing Witherden with a higher number than Duggan, but that's where a top 4 comparison comes in. When we raise the bar to the average top 4 medium defender over the last 5 years, Witherden drops from 20 out of 37 to 14 out of 37, whereas Duggan only drops from 19 to 17. Speaking of, it's probably best we change everybody's numbers here to their top 4 above average numbers. Back to the changes between the 2024 defensive lineup and the 2025 version you released recently. You have Bo Allen listed as a sub. First question, are you a fan of the sub or not?
I would say that the current version of the sub rule is cool. I'm good with it. Back in 2011, I think they first introduced it, and you had 3 on the bench plus the sub, and I think that lasted a few years. Then we had the whole medical sub thing, which was a little bit iffy in the way that it was, sort of regulated, like what were teams using it properly, etc. But I think now, where it's 4 and the sub, I think it gives good opportunity not only to protect your team if you have a concussion or some kind of other injury, or you can use it tactically, but it's also another opportunity to give someone like a game, someone like a Bo Allen, slot him into the round 1 team, give him, say, 2 quarters of experience. I think there's so many different benefits to having the sub rule. So I think the current version of it, I'm pretty happy with it, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it gives good opportunity for young players to get AFL minutes. I noticed that you did have Bo Allen as a sub. Is there anything stopping him from a starting role?
That's a good question. I think that's my suspicion is they see a talented young guy who's played Waffle seniors for the last however long, and I think they're going to look at him and think he needs to get into the team immediately to develop. So I think the plan will be to get him there. I suppose form and fitness, both for him and around him, will probably be the biggest variable. I'll be surprised if he gets through a good preseason and they don't find a way to squeeze him in even as the sub. But if there's a very unlikely scenario that no other player is injured in that back 6, then maybe that would be the stop him in the way. But I think in the team that I put out, I had him as the sub, but it only takes one player who's not at full fitness in that starting back 6 for him to make that team. So I think his chances are really good. I don't see too much maybe I'm overrating it, but I think I don't see too many scenarios where he doesn't make the AFL side either as the sub. In my opinion, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think he probably makes it straight into the side. I noticed that you moved Duggan to the wing and Liam Baker to the halfback flank, whereas in previous videos you had it the other way around. Where do you think Baker is best suited?
So that might be a little bit of intel more than my own opinion, because when Liam Baker came over, he was interviewed and asked, what was your best position? He said in the back half, and I believe that's the way he's actually going to line up for West Coast. Whereas I'm not sure if I knew that the first time I did it. It's also subsequently come out that Duggan is probably more likely to play midfield and wing than he is back. Now, we have heard that before, and it hasn't eventuated. So I think from what we're hearing from the club and little tidbits and where players are training in preseason, that the latter, so Duggan to the midfield and Baker backline, is probably the way they go with it. Where is he best suited? I think Baker's ground ball game and rebound, and I think that suits our backline a little bit more. We need a bit more zip. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good quality ball users, which the stats may indicate, which is not a strength of Baker's either. But I'd imagine he spends some time in the midfield. Again, probably playing a bit of a link-up role and running it and getting from contest to contest when he can. But I think traditionally, generally, he spends not a huge amount of time on ball. I haven't double-checked that. I think he's probably always going to have a second position. And the need for West Coast is much greater in the back half than it is in the forward half. So I think it's a perfect storm. He'll play in the back half and with stints on ball.
Yeah, I can certainly see the appeal of having Baker and Duggan further up the ground, but there's only so many spots on a team. Due to Duggan playing more predominantly halfback historically and Baker further up the ground, I'll place Duggan as a halfback flank, and we'll come back to Baker in a moment. Before we look at some charts to compare the potential differences between years, to confirm the 2025 lineup, I've got Marek coming in for Barras for obvious reasons, and then I've got Bo Allen coming in for Harvey Johnson's spot on the bench, not as a sub. Looking at the medium defensive 2024 charts, it's clear that Johnson is well behind target in rebound 50s, intercept marks and possessions, tackles, 1%ers, score involvements, and score launches. Many of those stats have been Bo Allen's strengths at junior level, so provided he can get some of that to translate to AFL level, then West Coast should see an improvement here. At this point, you might be saying, Woody, Bo Allen hasn't played yet. How are you going to project anything? Good question.
Oh, good question.
I'm going to be lazy, at least for now. In my very limited look into trying to project underage stats to AFL level, I couldn't see much of a way to do it accurately. So for now, I'm doing this. Bo Allen was compared to Ruben Jimby on Rookie Me. So I'm taking Ruben Jimby's first year stats and putting them in Bo Allen's place. So yeah, kind of lazy, but I haven't thought of anything better. It will be helpful for the total defensive output, and I am also open to better ideas too. Touching on key defenders versus top 4 defensive averages, I'm actually somewhat confident in Edwards and Jamison's ability to take over from Barras. Moving to the overall output, while the Eagles might see a fair reduction in spoils, 1%ers, total marks including intercept, contested, and maybe a few other stats, we do see increases in pressure acts, handball receives, and tackles too. In 2024, the sum of West Coast defensive output had 21 out of 37 important defensive stats above that of a top 4 defense. With this lineup for 2025, the projected sum of West Coast defensive output would see them with only 16 out of 37 important defensive stats above a top 4 defense. But as I mentioned earlier, Marek's stats can be misleading. If that were to be Callum Jamison, that jumps to 19 out of 37. So while I don't think this is a position that will see an area of improvement for West Coast in 2025, I also don't think the loss of Barras will be dire either. So what are your thoughts here, Jesse?
We hope as Eagles fans, if you just tell us that losing TB isn't an absolutely dire result, we'll consider that a win. Because with where West Coast list is at the moment, it was sort of a mutual decision to move him on for draft picks and invest in the future of the club. So I think we'd all kind of accepted our backline might not be as defensively sound as previous years. It's actually just also received a decent facelift. There was a lot of players cut. There were back half players for West Coast this year that played some footy, like Witherden, who ranked really highly in these stats. His exit might be a factor here. We're going to have a lot of new faces in there. So excuse me. I think we just have to have faith that, some of these new guys with a bit of talent can gel and play cohesive footy, and hopefully that will produce a better outcome than what the sum of the parts is currently suggesting. So I'll take that if it's a slight loss and TB, who's an absolute gun, leaves. I'm pretty comfortable with where that sits at the moment.
Pre-trade and draft, you had Ryan Marrick, Harley Reid, Jaden Hunt, Elliot Yeo, and Tim Kelly as your midfield brigade. In your most recent lineup, you've had Harley Reid, Jaden Hunt, Elliot Yeo, Liam Duggan, and Tim Kelly. Because I've already got Duggan in defense, Liam Baker will take this spot. Looking at the top 4 above average most important mid stats, there were 3 clear leaders in Elliot Yeo with 28 out of 42, Tim Kelly with 25, and Harley Reid with 21. After that, there was a fair drop off till Jaden Hunt with 13 out of 42 and Ryan Marrick with a measly 5 out of 42. As a side note, Jesse, I'm not trying to give Marrick bad scores. I know you're a fan of Marrick's game, and I am too. These lower scores tend to happen with taller players that play many roles across the field. The remaining midfielders who played for the Eagles this year were Campbell Chesser, Andrew Gaff, Clay Hall, Dom Sheed, and Zane True. Realistically, those backups just weren't good enough this year. Thankfully, the Eagles brought in mid-forwards Liam Baker and Jack Graham this off-season. While I'm sure they'll help with midfield rotations, the stats suggest they're both better in half-forward roles. West Coast also picked up Tom Gross and Luca Greco in the draft, and while I don't know how well they'll do in their first preseason, I'm not sure that either are immediate ins yet. Before we look at the charts, you've had a bit of time to digest the off-season now, Jesse. Upon reflection, are you more comfortable with your midfield stocks going into next year? Or do you see this as a position up for grabs for one of those recent or maybe even a future draftee?
Yeah, absolutely. So to make it clear, as a baseline, midfield, we already knew that was diabolical. So there was no, real expectation on the midfield improving massively. I do think hopefully Graham and Baker can play roles. I don't know how permanent they'll be. Maybe Graham will be a bit more permanent midfield than Baker. I'm not 100% sure until we see how Minnie's team rolls out. But look, it's a top-heavy midfield. Yeo and Kelly are very capable. Harley Reid obviously had a great season. I think, we were probably disappointed as Eagles fans maybe not to rectify it a little bit more with our draft. Again, Tom Gross, speculative, even if he looks talented. And Bo Allen may or may not become a midfielder. There's some sort of dual position doubt there. We don't know. And of course, we traded away pick 3. On the plus side, though, I do think that Elijah Hewitt could have a big year this year. To just put my Eagles Nuffy hat on, we all have a player that we think is going to have a huge year and surprise everyone. But I do think he might be a bit of a forgotten talent for us. I can't imagine, I don't know, but how he would rank in your stats. But I think in his first season, he played a bit forward and, got injured a couple of times. So if he's fit, I'm hoping he might be, a little bit of a dark horse in this analysis that at least helps West Coast midfield that needs a lot of help. It's not going to become, I'd imagine, a top 4 midfield this year, but we can certainly make up some ground if Elijah Hewitt becomes as good as I think he will be.
Hewitt is someone I wanted to discuss later, but having missed this last year and lack of additional games before that, it's hard to predict what he might be able to achieve. So he is someone that I've excluded, but I do think he offers a lot of potential upside for the Eagles. Looking at the output comparisons between the two graphs, we can see that the inclusion of Baker looks to improve almost every important mid stat. The ones that jump out to me the most are pressure acts, ground ball gets, and handball receives. In 2024, the sum of West Coast midfield output had 11 out of 42 important midfield stats above that of a top 4 midfield. With this lineup in 2025, the projected sum of the Eagles' midfield output would see them jump to 17 out of 42 important midfield stats above that of a top 4 midfield. Possibly my favorite part of all these improvements are that this is just off the back of 10 additional disposals per match. So the Eagles should just be more effective when they get the ball from stoppage. So what are your thoughts here, Jesse? Is this what you wanted to see?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we were expecting to revolutionise the midfield with our moves this year. I think we've done a good job of probably improving the floor of it rather than the ceiling, and consolidating some depth, get some mature bodies in there and a bit more support for Harley. So it is pleasing to see that this will translate in a few important stats getting better, definitely.
Yeah, that is if the ruckman can get them the ball.
Uh-oh.
Jesse, in your video, you went with Bailey Williams as the sole ruck for your best 22, and I tend to agree he was your best last year. You also played Matt Flynn for 4 games and Harry Barnett this year, but Barnett only played the 1 match and was subbed off, so his numbers can be somewhat ignored. West Coast also didn't pick up an experienced ruck or rookie, so we can't do much in terms of projections there. So before we look at some of Williams' stats against the top 4 ruck, I do wonder if Flynn was carrying an injury throughout the year, as his numbers just aren't where I expected them to be when he came over from the Giants a couple of years back.
I'm not sure what the consensus thoughts are on Flynn. I think we're all probably maybe we're judging him harshly. Yes, he did have an injury, so he came over, was recruited to be number 1 ruck with Bailey to be number 2. On the day before the preseason derby, he jumped into a bag and tore the hamstring off the bone. So he missed something like 12 weeks after that. Got back into the side and just didn't hit his straps and was quite poor, if I'm honest. And then went back to the waffle, and his form in the waffle was also quite average. I think he was losing hit out counts to opposition rucks in the waffle for a 26-year-old AFL listed ruck. It's not enough for us to write him off, but just on what I've seen so far, given that Bailey is younger and still quite young for a ruck in AFL terms, he's probably still a few years off his prime. At 24, I feel like rucks sort of develop a little bit later. So a little bit of youth bias there, age discrimination against Matthew Flynn. I think it's pretty line ball between them. I'm hoping both players can improve on their output from last year, because I think neither of them were as good as I think they can be.
Looking at the ruck key stats, Williams isn't too far behind in most aspects. As per most rucks, you'd like to see an improvement in hitouts to advantage, but I'd also like to see marks total and spoils go up, as that means Williams would be getting back behind the ball and helping out the defense more. Have you been happy with the growth of Bailey Williams over the last couple of years, Jesse?
Yeah, look, 2024 was a bit of a flat year from Bailey, if I'm going to be brutally honest. But in 2023, I think he really held his own. And I think that's sort of where the faith came in and picking him over Flynn, is because I've seen Bailey play well. I think he's had to do a lot for his age as a ruck. I think most rucks in the competition, other than, perhaps the really hard draft picks like Luke Jackson, but keeping it in context, I think Bailey's had a tough ask. I have some degree of faith. I mean, I think we can all think of a player on our team that we thought was useless as a tall prospect and then came good really late. Dean Cox was probably the most famous example of that for us. So on the basis that as rucks mature and they can use their big bodies a little bit more as they get older, I think Bailey has some upside there. But, it remains to be seen. The ball's really in his court. I think he's 24 or turning 25 next year. It's time to start seeing some improvement, even if he doesn't, become an All-Australian ruck.
For the best 22 pre-trade and draft video, you had Liam Ryan, Jake Waterman, Jamie Cripps, Jack Williams, Oscar Allen, and Tyrell DeWar in the starting forward 6, along with Jack Hutchinson and Noah Long on the bench. Starting with their key position forwards, as almost all of them were there, excluding Jack Darling, this is the Eagles' strongest line on the ground, and the loss of Darling shouldn't really affect things much as far as I'm concerned. That being said, I do find the inclusion of 4 key position forwards to be a slightly odd selection. In your more recent forward lineup, you've included Liam Ryan, Oscar Allen, Elijah Hewitt, Matt Owies, Jake Waterman, Jack Williams in the starting spots, with Hutchinson and Cripps on the bench. Is this something you think the Eagles prefer to do, or is this something that you prefer?
Well, we did do that at times in 2024 when we had Darling. However, I think we might be categorising Hutchinson differently. I presume that Hutchinson was the key forward that you're referring to. See, if you look at the Eagles website, he's described as a key forward. However, when he was drafted, he was described as a wing halfback forward. And then in the final game of the year, played on ball and won 6 clearances and a half. So that's my explanation. I wouldn't be putting him inside forward 50 as a key forward target. He's just one of those 190 centimetre athletes. Maybe you could describe as a little bit like Machito Owens in the hybrid sort of third tall, but we probably see him playing further up the field. So for me, he's a midfield rotation, but he hasn't shown enough for me to lock him in there. So genuine utility, forward, back, centre. But he can take a mark, so if we needed to play that role, he's got that flexibility.
Okay. Well, yeah, flexibility is good. In case anybody missed it, the Eagles picked up Matt Owies, who, based on the stats we deem important for the mid-forward role, would be the second to third best small forward on the given day, and becomes an immediate inclusion. Are you excited to see what he could do at the Eagles?
Yeah, the interesting thing about Owies that gets overlooked, and I before he even got to West Coast, I thought he was a little bit underrated in the sense that, kicking 33 goals as a small forward is definitely above average. You'd know the numbers better than me, but I'd say not that many small forwards around the competition are doing that, and yet he couldn't find a home. So even when you compare him to West Coast smalls or mediums, he's a lot more potent. Even if, maybe I feel like Liam Ryan and Jamie Cripps do great things up the field. Noah Long has some talent. None of them are really proven goal kickers anymore. So in terms of just potency and giving the Eagles, a look at goals regularly, even if he's not doing other spectacular things, I think I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Owies would have helped our numbers in the way you've ranked it going forward.
Yeah, you're right. The average top four medium mid forward kicked 1.02 and always did a fair bit better this last year. So I'm hoping he gets some respect out west. Now to the forward structures. Due to the higher matches played, I will go for Darling over Hutchinson in the 2024 forward lineup. I'll also make 2 changes to your 2025 lineup. Firstly, I'm going to opt for only 3 key position forwards as it just fits a bit better and there's more running available. Due to the height advantage and the slightly better results when comparing against top 4 key forwards, I'll also go for Williams over Hutchinson as well. Second, because Elijah Hewitt didn't play in 2024 and hasn't played much in general, for projection's sake, I'm going to replace him with Noah Long. So we've mentioned who will be in the starting 2024 forward roles and some changes to the 2025 structure. Before we compare the outputs, let's quickly touch on the remaining mid-medium forwards. The other mid and medium forwards for the Eagles this year were Jack Petruccelli, Jermaine Jones, Locke Rawlinson, Jai Cully, Luke Edwards, and Ryan Marrick. Of those players, only Petruccelli and Marrick played over half a season. So let's look at the forwards' average output as a whole from the 2024 lineup against the projected 2025 lineup. At first glance, you'll notice almost everything goes up. In fact, marks on lead was the only stat to go down, and that was by 0.1. This across the board improvement is achieved on a difference of less than a disposal a match. In 2024, the sum of West Coast forward line output was 22 out of 51 important forward stats above that of a top 4 forward line. With this lineup for 2025, the projected sum for West Coast forward line output would see them with 27 out of 51 important forward stats above that of a top 4 forward line. Considering you're effectively swapping Owies and Graham for DeWar and Darling stats-wise, would you have expected to see this sort of level of difference, Jesse?
We legit did roll with 4 when we had Darling. So, and that was like we were playing 2 rucks and 3 key forwards, I think, or maybe more. And we had Jack Williams still breaking the team. It was ridiculous.
In total, we used 70 player stats against a top 4 player in the same role to determine the effectiveness of the 6 different player types we use. We also use player cumulative averages to see if they surpass the expected output of a top 4 defense, midfield, ruck line, and forward line to see if the group might work well together or not. Technically, we could look at all of those 70 important stats across all lines and see how the whole team fares against an average top 4 side. So in 2024, the sum of West Coast output had 12 out of 70 important stats above that of a top 4 side. With this lineup for 2025, the projected sum of West Coast output would see them with 23 out of 70 important stats above that of a top 4 side. So I think the Eagles are improving next year. How much is the $1 million question? And I'll do some projection videos as we get to the next season. With the benefits of the mids too, we might finally start to see a more consistently competitive West Coast in 2025. Jesse, what do you think of my assessment of the Eagles, and do you share my enthusiasm?
This has far and away exceeded my optimism. And I'm glad we did this because now I feel a little bit better about the way we've invested into our team. I think when you employ such a fairly aggressive strategy to improve our best 23 this year and forego the draft and famously trade pick 3, I'm pleased to see that, it's resulted in a team that should be much better. I will say that at times, particularly in 2024, I felt like we played well above the sum of our parts and then immediately played well below the sum of our parts. You know, the way we played against Fremantle and Melbourne and smashed them, only to then put in 10 weeks where we look like we're barely putting in any effort. I think we've always been a little bit more capable than we've been demonstrating. So I am pleased to see that logically we should improve. That means something to me. But, you know, new coach, new system, you know, that could either be a really positive thing or it might take a while to gel. So I'll say it has made me feel a little bit better. Hopefully it results in a few more wins because there hasn't been many over the last 3 years.
Well, I'm glad I could lift your spirits and optimism for next year. Thanks again, Jesse. If you somehow found my channel and not Jesse's, you can find the links to True Eagle and True Footy in the description below. Go and give him a sub. He puts out tons of content on Eagles specific stuff on True Eagle and not on True Footy. Thanks again for watching the assessment of the Eagles 2024 side and what the changes in their offseason might bring. My name's Woody and this is Wooden Spoon Data. If you like this video and want to see more data-focused AFL content, click the subscribe button and the notification bell to be kept up to date. There will be some videos suggested on the side that YouTube thinks you might like. Go have a watch of them. Thanks again.
First time.